Good afternoon. I'm Lynn Singer, Deputy Provost, and I'd like to welcome you to our luncheon and our keynote address of the conference today on collaboration. First of all, I would like to express my gratitude to Lev Gonik, our Chief Information Officer and Vice President for Information Services, and the Weatherhead School of Management for once again bringing to Case Western Reserve University and to Cleveland the creative and cutting edge of technology use for our benefit through this conference on collaboration and technology and engaging the campus 2008. Everything I know about IT I've learned from Lev, and I can vividly recall each of his painstaking introductions to me of such terms as Wiki and blogging and Second Life, plugging into Second Life and podcast. The fact that all those terms seem so normal right now are really a tribute to Lev and to his staff. And I'd like to see how many of the people who work in IT are here today. Raise your hands. I think we owe them a big hand, and thank you for working so hard to continuously keep people like me abreast and ahead of the developments in this very important area for education. Today, it is my great pleasure to introduce to you our keynote speaker, Anthony Williams. Anthony Williams is co-author of Wikinomics, How Mass Collaboration Changes Everything. Anthony Williams is Vice President of Government 2.0 at New Paradigm. An avid researcher and writer, Anthony has pursued his interest in the wide-ranging impacts of new technologies on social and economic life for over a decade. His work has been featured in publications such as Business Week, The Globe and Mail, and Optimize, and is widely circulated in proprietary syndicated research programs. He was previously research director with Digital Foresight and has consulted for Fortune 500 firms and international institutions, including the World Bank. He holds a master's degree in research in political science from the London School of Economics and is currently a PhD candidate in the Department of Government. And I think he's going to have a great future impact on what occurs in terms of regulation. Wikinomics and the future of education. Wikinomics has been called, quote, a brilliant guide to one of the most profound changes of our time. Wikinomics challenges our most deeply rooted assumptions about business and will prove indispensable to anyone who wants to understand competitiveness in the 21st century. I believe we're very fortunate to have Anthony here with us today, and I would like to welcome you on behalf of Case Western Reserve. So now to our speaker.
Well, thank you very much, and good afternoon, everybody. I'm delighted to be here. Education is probably one of my sort of keenest passions. It's something that us at New Paradigm are keenly interested in and something we're investigating as part of our research. New Paradigm, just to brief you, we're a small research company, but we do large syndicated research programs. And we're currently involved in a large study of the transformation of the public sector, working with the Office of Management and Budget, the Treasury Board in Canada, some of our colleagues in Finland and Singapore, looking at how Wikinomics is going to change not just business, but virtually every institution in society, including the educational sector, the science sector, including government, and of course, democracy. So, although Wikinomics was a book primarily about how mass collaboration was changing the nature of business and wealth creation, we think the implications go much broader. And in fact, even the term Wikinomics itself has become part of the vernacular, and I'm delighted to say that it's actually part of the vernacular in about 21 different languages around the world, which has far surpassed anything that we ever imagined that this book could achieve. What I'd like to do this morning is reflect on some of the core ideas of the book, some of the forces that are driving change in today's world. I'll talk a little bit about some of the big stories that we featured in the book, but then what I really want to do is focus on how these ideas, these new models of collaboration, some of these new technologies that you've been talking about over the course of the day can transform education. Before I do that, I think it's probably worthwhile, just kind of giving you a little bit of my sort of personal history and how this whole journey that we started on unfolded. I've been working with my co-author, Don Tapscott, now for probably close to a decade, since 1998. I took a sabbatical in 2003, decided to do my PhD at the London School of Economics, and I've been working on a bunch of fascinating stuff. In June 2005, I said to Don, hey, why don't you check out some of the stuff I've been working on? And Don read it, and he was delighted and said, this really should be a book, and would you work on it with me? And of course I said, absolutely. It was the opportunity of a lifetime. Well, what was that research that I was sharing with him? Well, one of the things I was doing was taking a look at the blogosphere, which of course in 2005 was, there was 10 million bloggers according to Technorati, which to us, seemed like a pretty profound number. 10 million people using this, new personal publishing technology to express their thoughts on culture, on politics, on technology, and to communicate with the world in a way that perhaps wasn't ever possible before. Little did we know that, by the time that the book would be published, that number would have grown sevenfold, that there's now at least 70 million individuals around the world using this new personal publishing technology to communicate with their friends, with their colleagues, with the entire world. And in fact, this is now an increasingly global phenomenon. I think 36 or 37% of all blog posts are written in Japanese, it turns out. Some of the fastest growth of the blogosphere is actually in China. So this is truly pretty astounding. But it didn't end there. The research actually got even more interesting as we started to take a look at what was happening out there. This is a map of web traffic over the last 3 years. And as you can see here, blogger.com, which is the largest site for personal bloggers, now gets more traffic than CNN.com. What a remarkable shift in the balance of power in the media industry. What it said to us was, of course, CNN hasn't necessarily lost its relevance per se. Of course, it still has its network of satellite communications. It has its reporters stationed around the world. But what people were saying collectively, I think, in going, to blogger.com is that they wanted to participate in that conversation. They didn't just want to be passively fed the news. They wanted to be engaged in it. They wanted to have, their own editorial voice, and they wanted to share their thoughts and reflections with other people around the world. Now, it wasn't just CNN versus the bloggers. Of course, at the same time, we started to see Myspace erupt as a huge social phenomenon. And if you look here, you can see that when you compare Myspace versus MTV, again, these collaborative communities were displacing and disrupting these traditional media entities. Again, I think what the young people were saying is we just don't want to passively sit there and watch music videos. We want to engage with the artists we love. And Myspace was, an opportunity to connect directly with artists, and there's some 40,000 artists who, use Myspace as a venue in which to connect with their fans. And in fact, it doesn't end there. We've seen the rise of this whole network of a legion, in fact, of bedroom DJs who, use cheap editing tools and remix the songs of their favorite artists, and then they use the internet as a platform to share those remixes with the world, with their friends and even with the artists. So, smart artists are starting to clue into this, and I think it provides a future direction for the music industry. Of course, nobody could escape, the fact that Wikipedia had perhaps become the poster child in many ways for these new forms of collaboration. For those of you at the back of the room, that red line along the bottom there is actually Encyclopedia Britannica. Unfortunate for them, but the statistics on Wikipedia are quite remarkable, and when we looked at that, it really forced us to kind of rethink our notions of what was possible in terms of collective action. For those of you who have studied politics and economics, you might be familiar with some of the the conventional wisdom on collective action, that it was next to impossible except for in very tightly defined small groups of people. But of course, what this demonstrates is that millions of people can collectively produce this incredible wealth of human knowledge. 2 million English language articles, now been translated into about 200 different languages. Some 1 million people have made edits on Wikipedia at some point in time. And what they think is that there's about 70,000 of those people who are regular contributors to Wikipedia. People who, contribute, have maybe a domain of expertise or something that they're quite passionate about, and they're always, checking out the entries on Wikipedia and helping to update them and keep them fresh and accurate as possible. Collectively, Encyclopedia Britannica, I think, well, actually Wikipedia is about 15 times larger in terms of the scope of the topics it covers, but it's also the ninth most visited site on the web, which means it has incredible influence. So there are, of course, issues around quality and quality control, things that we think that are going to get ironed out over time. Maybe I'll reflect on those later on, or if people have questions, that's something I'd love to elaborate on. At the same time, we were seeing these, incredible collaborative communities emerging. We were seeing a deep transformation in the nature of business. And perhaps, one of the stories that I think is perhaps most powerful is the story of Procter Gamble. P&G has been a remarkably innovative company, but around the year 2000, they found that it didn't matter how much money they were investing in internal R&D. They simply weren't generating more products and services. And they said that, around that time in 2000, that the speed of change in their industry, the pace of innovation had tripled in about 5 years. And they were having a harder and harder time keeping up with the, global competition in the marketplace. So the CEO, he set a very ambitious and quite remarkable goal. He said that Procter & Gamble, as a company, within 5 years, would be sourcing 50% of all of its new ideas from outside its boundaries. Now, just to put that in perspective, they have about 9,000 world-class researchers inside their R&D organization. These are people who are at the top of their fields, people who are highly respected and have done great work for P&G. But for every one of those 9,000, they know of another 200 who are just as good. So if you do the math, that's about 1.8 million people whose talents they could potentially tap into. Now, P&G can't afford to employ 1.8 million people full-time, but through the clever use of mass collaboration, through new networks of scientific experts, they can start to tap into some of those talents around the world in a much more ad hoc and fluid basis. Now, one of the systems that they use, one of the communities that they use online in order to achieve that is called Innocentive. Now, Innocentive is a very interesting network. It was set up originally by Eli Lilly, which is a pharmaceutical company, and then it was eventually moved outside as its own independent entity. Now, what Innocentive has is a network of 125 scientists around the world. These 125,000 scientists reside mostly in China and India, in Eastern Europe, and other locations around the world. And these are people in research universities who are perhaps looking for new economic opportunities. And what happens is a company like Procter & Gamble has a problem that it can't solve internally. And it decides to post that problem on this Innocentive network. Then all of a sudden, somebody with the right combination of ideas, expertise, and skills can perhaps solve that problem. And in exchange for solving that problem, they may get a cash reward. Typically, the cash rewards range from somewhere between $10,000 and $100,000. So all of a sudden, P&G has created this worldwide network, this virtual R&D department, and all of these, budding scientists and perhaps graduate students who are working in universities around the world have an opportunity to solve these problems. In fact, some companies have actually decided that they can form their own business model around Innocentive, that they can start to solve these problems for Dow and Boeing and DuPont and all the other, big scientific, research-based companies, and they can actually generate quite a healthy living doing so. Now, at the same time, we saw companies like IBM were starting to invest in Linux, a free open source operating system. And many people, wondered why would a, conventional software company start to invest in Linux? Most people had dismissed Linux as a bit of a hacker experiment, a bit of a fad. Most people thought that it would never approach the robustness or the completeness of a proprietary system like Microsoft Windows. Well, IBM thought, somewhat differently. They saw opportunities in Linux. They knew that their customers, their enterprise customers, were curious about Linux, were thinking about maybe installing it on an enterprise basis. So for IBM, this looked like a neat value proposition. Not only could they start to work with this whole network of thousands of programmers around the world who are collaborating to develop this operating system, they could actually develop a business out of it. In fact, they invest about $100 million in Linux-related development every single year, but they save about $900 million over what it would cost to develop the equivalent of Linux in-house. So if IBM had decided to start from scratch to create Linux in-house, they think it would cost about $1 billion. So they're saving enormous amounts of money. At the same time, their work with their enterprise clients to install Linux on an enterprise basis, also to bundle Linux with hardware like web servers and so forth, is generating about $1 billion a year. And all of a sudden, all of these other companies are jumping on the bandwagon. You've got TiVo runs Linux, and BMWs run Linux as part of their operating system. So does a Motorola Razr and a PlayStation 3. The list is getting longer and longer. So, what started out as this, kind of hacker experiment has also generated a multi-billion-dollar industry. Microsoft, as it's looking for new sources of talent to develop games for the Xbox, is increasingly turning to its customers. It figures that, it can outsource things to India and China, but at the end of the day, the people who are probably most passionate about developing for the Xbox platform are the people who are playing these games. And increasingly, you've got this new generation of whiz kids who, have the skills and capability to do so. So, what Microsoft has done is create a platform that makes it very easy for these customers to start creating their own games, which they can distribute through the Xbox Live marketplace. And of course, it goes deeper than that, because this, very speech that I'm giving here, in fact, this whole conference is being streamed through Second Life. And Second Life is perhaps one of the most remarkable products in the sense that 99% of the value creation is done by the people who reside there, the customers of Second Life. Linden Labs, figures it does about 1% of the work. So here's a system, in which, all of the value is created by the customers. They actually own the intellectual property rights and can actually make a living within these environments. So one more example, and I think this is, another pretty profound one. As we were doing the research for the book, we were thinking about the Human Genome Project as a great example of mass collaboration in action. And what we discovered is that 11 of the largest pharmaceutical companies in the world actually agreed with us. They had reached a stage in the Human Genome Project where about 20% of the genome was privately owned. And there was great concern within the scientific community that private ownership, this race to the patent office, was actually going to stifle innovation and stifle scientific progress. There was a scientist by the name of Alan Williamson. He was the chief scientist at Merck, and he was a bit of a leader for this community of scientists. And he said, look, at the end of the day, we need one map of the human genome. We want to get there as fast as possible. As pharmaceutical companies, we compete on commercializing new medicines. We don't compete on, how fast we can get our patent applications through the patent office. That's not the kind of game we're in. So, why don't we open source this? We'll collectively pool our resources. We'll work with scientists around the world and research universities, and we'll expedite this process. At the end of the day, that's what they were able to achieve. They put all of their intellectual property in the public domain, and then agreed that at a certain point they would agree to compete, and that competition would be on how quickly they could harness that knowledge to develop new personalized medicines or cures to diseases like cancer and AIDS and so forth. So a remarkable, again, story of companies seeing the benefits of mass collaboration. Now, on a kind of macro scale, what we determined as a result of the research and so forth, that we had entered in fact, an age of participation, if you will, where some of the most exciting and dynamic products and services were not created by large conventional enterprises, but by these loose, amorphous collaborations of thousands, sometimes even millions of individuals. And that people, as individuals, all of a sudden had new opportunities to participate in the economy in ways that weren't previously impossible. So, think of the story of the, the Indian and Chinese scientists who are contributing to P&G's virtual research department. Those are opportunities that didn't exist previously. Now, at the same time, we were seeing a new mantra within, the large corporations that we were observing, and many of the clients, in fact, that we work with, which is that increasingly it's not sufficient to be competitive in today's world to rely solely on your internal talent. Of course, you still need to hire, where possible, the best and the brightest, but you have to assume as an organization that the best and the brightest are probably residing outside your organization. And the key to success, the key to competitiveness, is to find ways to tap into those external sources of skill, knowledge, and insight in ways that can drive new ideas, new innovation, better agility, and so forth. So I think that, in essence, is the sort of the key crystal of Wikinomics. So what I'd like to do just for a moment is step back a little bit. I know a lot of you are kind of thinking about collaborative technologies, and I want to talk about two forces that we think are driving this new collaborative environment. One, of course, is the changes in technology and the Web 2.0. The second is demographic, the rise of this new generation of young kids who have literally, can't relate to a world without Google, instant messaging, and cell phones, and increasingly Second Life. So what is, first of all, unique about the Web 2.0, and how can we sort of explain what this new phenomenon is? Well, I think one thing that we observe with most technological revolutions is that when a new technology surfaces in society, it's quite conventional for us to impose our traditional mental models on this new technology. So, the first generation of web technologies were largely, even though the same interactive capacity existed, people really thought about it as a new way to publish information on the internet. It was really a publishing model, if you will. And I think what we've seen with this second generation of web technologies is we're moving to a new model, one where people aren't just sitting back and passively downloading content. They're engaged in creating the content themselves, and they become, in a sense, the essence of a lot of these online communities. We like to say that it is now possible for an ordinary individual, in fact everybody in this room, to program the internet. Because every time you update your Facebook profile, or you tag a photo on Flickr, or perhaps you're modifying an entry on Wikipedia, or you're uploading a video to YouTube, in some sense you are programming the internet. You're changing this fabric of knowledge and information that we have available to us in the World Wide Web. And it's getting richer and richer. We see with Yahoo Pipes, this is really neat application where it helps lay people or individuals build their own kind of mashups of software and web-based services. So in this case, one of the neatest applications is something that was put together just by someone who was a random user. And what he did is he took an RSS feed from the New York Times. He scans all the keywords from those headlines, and then he automatically pulls all the relevant photos from Flickr that correspond to those keywords. So you get this really kind of rich, package of, this mashup, a sense of the New York Times and Flickr. That's just one example. So where else, might we be going? We spend a lot of time back at our shop thinking about the future of technology and where it's headed. So, one thing that we've certainly observed is that, the old web of two-dimensional text and graphics is pretty much history. With broadband capacity and with all of these new rich media sites, we're getting a truly multimedia experience, and increasingly the internet will be the platform for all media. The kind of distinctions, people call this convergence, the distinctions between the different, media will start to disappear. But of course, on the internet, it goes further than that. Again, just taking a look at Second Life, we have this, really rich three-dimensional virtual world. And a lot of people speculate that those virtual worlds might in fact be the way that we interface to all internet web-based services in the future. That's just one vision. Another thing I think that's quite interesting is, this idea that connectivity is extending from humans and computers to everyday objects of all, sorts of descriptions. So this here is the beyond microwave. It's the internet-connected microwave that knows the settings for 4,000 different products and will download updates from the internet. At the same time, we're seeing, farmers' fields that are connected to the internet. So that if you have your irrigation system, it's not only does it have sensors in the ground that are detecting the hydration levels in the soil, it's also downloading weather reports so that it can predict in advance how much water will be needed, to properly irrigate the field. So this is the kind of, world that we're living in, where, everything from your home electronic system through to your farmers' fields are connected to the internet. It goes even further than that, because we've seen the rise, especially in Europe and in Asia, of these QR codes, which are essentially just slightly more sophisticated barcodes. And of course, you can embed them in anything, and then people can use that to get redirected to new sources of information. So this gentleman with the t-shirt here has a QR code on his t-shirt on the back, which would automatically, if you scan it with your phone, give you his contact details. That little clock... That little clock radio could, if you were scanning it again with your phone, could tell you the details of the songs that are playing on the radio at that time. That billboard-sized QR code there is an advertisement for an airline. So if you happen to be in Tokyo and you want to book a flight, you just point your phone at that QR code and it'll give you a listing of all the exotic destinations that you can go to in the next couple of hours. So it's getting, I think personally, it gets more interesting than that still, because we're seeing the rise of visual search technologies. We have these incredible databases that are connected to the internet of images. So if, for example, you just bought a new CD and you scan if you take a picture of the cover, it will automatically download the ringtone to your phone. Or if you're passing by a movie poster and you take a snap of that picture with your phone, again, it will tell you, which theaters are showing the movie, and probably even enable a transaction where you can buy tickets. You pass a friend or even a stranger on the street, you take a picture of their face, and it looks through a whole library of Facebook profiles and finds the corresponding person on Facebook and gives you all of their details. Or how many people maybe are going out for a date tonight? I guess this audience isn't, excuse me. In any case, next time you're going on a date, you take a picture of the wine bottle, and you automatically get all of this rich information about where the wine, originated from, whether it goes better with chicken or fish or beef, and you become an instant sommelier, and you impress your date, as you're looking at your BlackBerry underneath the table. So it really, I think, we're heading for interesting times. Of course, one of the other things I think that's quite remarkable is that there are, about 2 billion more cell phone users in the world than there are internet users. And increasingly, of course, most of the world will be accessing the internet through mobile phones. 97% of Tanzanians say they can access a mobile phone, so increasingly that means they can access the internet. Which I think is quite promising given the problems that we've seen with the digital divide. The other thing that I think is really going to rock our world, so to speak, is what we call digital physical convergence. This, in a sense, this kind of blending of the physical and digital worlds in ways that perhaps were unanticipated. How many people here have Google Earth on their computers? Most of the room. If you don't, I insist that you go out and get it because it's such a wonderful, such a wonderful application. Here we have a really neat partnership that was between a whole network of independent photographers, the National Holocaust Museum, the State Department, and of course Google. And what they did is they went to Darfur. Of course, many of you have heard about the atrocities in the Sudan, and they took pictures of all of those, various refugee camps and burned out villages. And if you go to fly over the Sudan on Google Earth, you can click on those little photographic icons and get the kind of details that are displayed there in that picture. You get, both the picture and the narrative that accompanies the picture. So, just a great application. And of course, as scientists were tracking the spread of the avian flu in Asia, they were using Google Earth to pinpoint the locations of those particular outbreaks, where they were happening, the size of the outbreak. So we're seeing these geospatial tools becoming, instruments of science and even social action. We're also seeing, the rise of what you could call sort of really rich neighborhood information systems. It's easy enough to get all the locations of the nearest Starbucks if you pull up your Google map, but increasingly I think what we'll see is these comprehensive neighborhood systems in which you can find out about all the local services available in your neighborhood and who's doing what. This particular one is really interesting. It's called Wiki City Rome. It was a project of MIT. And what they did is they essentially tracked, through the use of mobile phone signals, the flow of people through Rome over a 24-hour period. And if you go to Wiki City Rome, you can actually see this very time-condensed snapshot, if you will, of this 24-hour period where people are you see all those little blue dots. Those are all the cell phone signals that they've detected. So that, the people, as they move throughout the city, the locations they're going to and so forth, and you get all this rich information. So I think things are getting quite interesting in that regard. And finally, with respect to geospatiality, we're seeing some interesting new applications. The one on the right there is a remarkable application from Japan for mobile temporary workers. Now, here's how it works. You have a particular trade or skill that you're good at. You fill out this profile, this social network profile, and you give them, your the little identification thing on your mobile phone, so that if you're hanging out one day and you're looking for some work, and maybe somebody in your neighborhood is looking for a painter, let's just say, they can automatically pull up this list of all the people who have skills for painting in their immediate neighborhood, right? So it becomes essentially this sort of temporary agency, if you will, all enabled by social networking and mobile phones that are based on individual skills and their proximity to the work that needs to be done. On the left there is something called Social Light, which enables people to start tagging the physical world, so to speak. So let's say your roommate is sitting at home connected to the internet and knows that you're about to pass by the grocery store at about 6 p.m. So they leave using their computer a little virtual sticky note on that geographic area there located immediately outside the grocery store and says, hey, don't forget to pick up some milk on the way home. As you're passing by at about 6 p.m., you get a little notification on your cell phone that says, hey, please pick up some milk. And you can start to annotate, if you will, the entire physical world. So, you go to a restaurant that you really love, and of course you can leave a little virtual sticky note for your friends that says, this is a great restaurant, try the Hawaiian pizza. or whatever the case may be. So again, the capabilities are getting richer and richer. The other thing I wanted to talk about, I mentioned, was this new generation of digital natives. How many people here have children between, say, the ages of 13 and 30? A lot of people in the room, so you're quite accustomed to what this new generation is all about. We think that the experience of growing up digital conditions young people to think, learn, interact differently than previous generations. And it's not just, we don't just say that on a whim, we think there's actual scientific evidence. I'll get to that in a moment that suggests that actually the experience of growing up digital changes the way that the brain is wired. Before we get to that, though, just to show the demographics here, we have a chart. You can see the boomers are on the left there in the light blue. They delayed having children. You saw this bust in the birth rate. That's typically what people refer to as Generation X. As the boomers started having children, they had what we call the net generation. Other people call them Generation Y, the millennials. We think the net generation is appropriate because, of course, the big historical transformation that was happening at the same time as these people were growing up is the fact that the internet was coming into, the public domain and widespread mainstream usage. Of course, as educators or people involved in education, you can see the same kind of demographic curve in school enrollment. Globally, things are even more remarkable if you think about the fact that globally, this generation is in excess of 2 billion people, and most of those people are in India and China, most of those young people. Other places like Indonesia as well, and Iran for that matter. But in any case, in India and China, there are about 10 times as many young people as there are in North America. Of course, that fact is going to reshape our world, I think, in the next couple of decades, especially in light of the fact that increasingly these young people are going to have access to the global economy in ways that previous generations in those countries did not. Here's just a little interesting exercise here. You take the map of the world as we know it today, conventional, based on geography. If you tweak that map for the number of children under 15, it looks, of course, radically different. Let me just give you that before shot there. There's the world as we know it. There's the world according to the number of children under 15. Of course, the orange there being India, the green being China. Russia has disappeared. Canada has more or less disappeared as well, I'm sad to say, being a Canadian. In any case, you get the sense of how this demographic transition will reshape economics, politics, and society more broadly. Of course, we did a lot of research on this generation as part of our work at New Paradigm, and we interviewed 11,000 young people in 12 different countries. So you can see there that included US and Canada, included Germany, the UK, France, Spain, Germany, Mexico, Brazil, Russia, China, Japan, and India. So a nice kind of representative global sample of young people. What you see consistently around the world is that if you ask them, would you rather live without television or the internet, of course they say they just can't imagine a world without the internet, remarkably and universally across all of those countries. If you ask Xers or Boomers, you get a much more even distribution between those two options. We did another interesting thought exercise. We asked a subsample of those 11,000 to put together a digital scrapbook. One of the questions we put to them was, what would your life be like if we took away your digital tools for 30 days? And of course, this was the kind of collage that they put together for us. Of course, everything that they do is mediated through technology. The way that they interact with their friends, the way that they do their homework, the way that they like to work in the workplace. It all is mediated in one way or another through technology. This young person needed 2 pages to express their thoughts on that particular dilemma. But the overwhelming sense is this feeling of feeling tense and nervous and withdrawn and disconnected from their friends and their social networks. But I think one of the positive aspects of this, and again this comes from our global survey of young people, is that these are what we call prosumers, people who aren't content to passively receive products and services and information. They want to be part of that value creation process. Of course, this has deep implications for education and the way it's delivered. What does education look like when all of a sudden the teacher isn't the sole authority in the room? All of a sudden you've got 30 or maybe 100 or even more students in your class who want to be part of that conversation. So I think that's both something that scares teachers, educators, but also provides a real opportunity, I think, to rethink the models of education. Of course, it's not just education, but democracy, I think, that needs rethinking as well. One of the reasons, of course, Obama has been quite popular, I think, and has built this sense of affinity with young people is because he has he's promised change. Nobody yet knows whether he can deliver, but nevertheless, that message of change, that message of engagement of, you can be part of the conversation that will get rid of, some of the special interests and the moneyed politics that has dominated politics here in the United States and certainly in many other countries around the world. That is quite refreshing to young people. They don't like this idea of being broadcast to for 4 years and then being asked after 4 years to deliver their vote. They want something more genuine than that, a chance to influence policy, to speak to their elected officials. A lot of people say that young people are disengaged, they're not interested in politics. We don't think that's true. We think it's just they're disenchanted with the political process as it currently operates. If you look at statistics of volunteering in community organizations, in fact, you see that that level of volunteerism is in fact up since Generation X. It's increased. So they are concerned about the world and they're interested in political issues. It's just they need new channels for engagement. Now, I mentioned I would talk just a little bit about this scientific research. We have been working with a cognitive scientist, Stan Kuchar, who's at Dalhousie University, and part of his research, and not just his research, but other researchers as well, is looking at the impact of interactive technology on brain function. The hypothesis is that the brain has about 12 executive functions, and by exercising those functions, some of them will grow more robust than others. To give you an example from some previous research, not on the net generation, but on taxi drivers in London. I spent 4 years in London, and if you have an appreciation for how that city operates, you know that the kind of geospatial awareness that a taxi driver would have to navigate through that city. Now, of course, what the scientific research showed is that the hippocampus, which is in part responsible for your geospatial orientation, is actually larger in the population of London taxi drivers than it is in the general population of the United Kingdom. They also did a study of microsurgeons and found that young surgeons actually are more dexterous, more skillful when it comes to microsurgery, and largely because of their experience growing up playing video games. That actually has prepared them to be better surgeons than even those who have had decades of experience. So the hypothesis is that by exercising these new functions, certain skills become accentuated. So, for instance, the ability to multitask, to switch rapidly between different tasks, the ability to manipulate visual information. Some people say that the world of online video games prepares young people to be better, more effective workers because they're used to assimilating information rapidly, collaborating with these vast virtual teams of people that they collaborate with through World of Warcraft and other games. So this certainly has very interesting ramifications. So let me spend just the rest of the time that we have here talking a little bit about Education 2.0 and what it might look like. And it certainly starts from this whole set of new Web 2.0 tools that we have available to us, blogs and shared bookmarks and wikis, social networking. We've all heard about it, but how could it actually make a real impact on the way that education is conducted today? And I think there's some interesting possibilities. Of course, the knee-jerk reaction has been in many cases to shut down access to these tools, for a variety of different reasons. But we think there's a better approach, and I'll just share with you some of the insights that we've had, not just working, thinking about education per se, but also working with some of the world's largest companies and their approach to starting to leverage these tools. We've seen a number of innovators. So, take blogging, for instance. So what is blogging good for? Well, it's a great medium for really authentic communication, I think. The CEO of Sun Microsystems has decided that he no longer is going to communicate to any of his employees through email. He says, email for him is banned. He's only going to communicate through his blog, and he feels that the blog is an opportunity for him to kind of craft his thoughts, his vision, his values for the overall company, and also a way, for employees then to become part of that conversation. Then that conversation becomes transparent for the entire organization, and not just the comments from Jonathan Swartz and the stuff that he's put on his blog, but all the employees who have taken the time then to respond and provide comments on his blog. So it provides this much sort of richer model of communication. At the BBC and at British Telecom, they're pioneering the use of blogs, again, to provide an avenue for leadership for young people in the organization. The way that things are working in those companies is that innovation can come from anywhere. And part of the way that you build a community of people who might support your new ideas is you blog about it. And then people get excited and they might, that vision might resonate with them. So it's quite exciting. I've seen, I took a snap of Lev's blog here because I think it's a great example of how, people within an institution can start to express themselves and provide a vision for what, is exciting in their life and their world. I mean, there's enormous sort of organizational and institutional fear about, this idea that all of a sudden anybody can issue a press release. All of a sudden anybody can speak for the organization. Especially in government, we've learned that, governments don't like this idea because they like to strictly control communication. And as soon as you start putting stuff on a blog, it's interpreted as official policy. But I think we need to kind of relax that a little bit and speak more authentically and get people engaged in these conversations. Wikis are, a phenomenal way, we think, to do structured teamwork and, of course, also to create incredible knowledge bases for your organization. One of the, actually, examples, and this one does come from the public sector, that we are quite fond of is Intellipedia. And as many of you know, there was a fair amount of criticism of the various institutions, agencies responsible for national intelligence in the wake of 9/11. Part of their response and part of the criticism initially was that you've got the NSA, you've got the CIA, you've got the FSA, you've got probably 20 different agencies that are responsible for some aspect of national security and national intelligence. None of them were sharing information. So Intellipedia has become their version of Wikipedia. It provides this ability for people, irrespective of what agency they happen to work for, to collaborate collectively to identify potential threats and to build, very quickly a whole knowledge base around that particular threat or whatever the case may be. We've seen similar things in the Department of State to enable, people to in the Foreign Service to work more effectively. We think, the possibilities are endless. But I wanted to share this with you because this came from my friend Chris Rasmussen, who is one of the key people behind Intellipedia, and it shows the benefit of the Wiki collaboration model. You can see on the one hand there, on the left, you've got the traditional approach to email collaboration, which is that somebody writes a Word document and then you start to email it around, and soon you've got 5 or 6 different copies, and they're all out of sync. But my question is what if you wanted to get input from 1,000 different people simultaneously? Could you do that with email? The answer is, of course not. It's impossible. How could you possibly have, a document, a Word document, being emailed around between 1,000 different people? With a wiki, that actually is possible. We like to call it parallel processing for humans because, it gets everybody working off one central document that everybody can edit and update. So it's a fantastic tool. And why not use that as Curriki has done, as they have suggested, to create your educational curriculum? Why are we kind of stuck in this 20th century publishing model with textbooks and so forth when you could have a curriculum that is constantly updated, with teachers adding their experience, their anecdotes, their success stories from around the world? For us, it's an incredible opportunity. At the same time, why not wiki the educational administration? I mean, could you find ways to get, your entire organization having input into the strategy for the university? And, could you find a way, one of the things actually that comes up all the time in our discussions, whether we're talking to companies or governments, is that, you've got this imminent retirement of the baby boomers. In the next, 5 to 10, maybe 20 years, most of them are going to retire. That's a huge segment of your workforce that's going to walk out with all of that knowledge that they've gleaned over the years. And you've got to find some way to capture it before it exits the organization. And so, of course, these social media tools provide a real opportunity to do that and to ensure that there's knowledge transfer between the leaders that are exiting the organization and the people who are going to inherit those positions. Another, I think, fabulous opportunity is to think about social networking. Again, the knee-jerk reaction in a lot of educational organizations, and indeed in companies and governments, has been to, shut off access to Facebook and other social networking tools. They're seen as a bit of a distraction. They're seen as a drag on bandwidth for people who are in the IT department, a security risk, and so forth. We think there's a great opportunity to hey, look, you get students connected with students, gets teachers connected with teachers, students and teachers connected, and parents and students and teachers connected, all connected together using these social networks. And the opportunity is quite interesting. We built this This doesn't actually exist. We just did a mock-up. We did this for our enterprise clients, but it's what we call the rich user profile. And it's kind of a little bit like LinkedIn, but it's got some additional elements that LinkedIn doesn't have. So you have your conventional CV. At the bottom, you have your peer recommendations from people who have worked with you and would like to comment on their interactions with you. You've got your RSS feed that has all of the work activities that you're currently undertaking, and then at the bottom you've got things like your skills and the groups that you're affiliated with. Well, what if you did this for a university? So all of a sudden you've got every student has this rich user profile. They've got their CV there. They've got the recommendations from their peers and their teachers. They've got, instead of work activities, they've got all of the essays that they're currently writing or all the projects that they're currently working on. And then they've got all of the, university clubs that they're involved in, and all of a sudden you've got this, rich information about individuals that could be used as a basis for collaborating with other students, with teachers, and so forth. In fact, we have this idea that companies should be moving to talent markets. Rather than having your manager decide what tasks you should be doing for this week or the next month or the next year, you have a list within the company of all of the projects that need people. All the staff, apply for the projects, and the managers ultimately decide who works on what. But it's based on this, rich set of social network profiles. Of course, perhaps you could implement the same sort of thing in a university context. We've seen companies start to, as I mentioned, we have this notion of prosumers, consumers who want to get engaged in the actual product design process. Well, why not set up an innovation forum where people, all of the students, all the faculty can start to suggest ideas about, how things might be done differently, new sources of innovation, new ideas. If Dell can create an idea storm, and an idea storm is quite simple, really. It's a forum where customers of Dell can post ideas for new products, things that they'd like to see incorporated into Dell computers, and then the whole community votes on them. So the best ideas, or at least the most popular ideas, perhaps not the best, but certainly the most popular, rise to the top. And then Dell can use that as a cue, for the ideas that they are going to embed in future products. And if you see, they've got an area on the site where you can discuss those ideas, and you can actually see which ones have been put into action. So the whole thing is transparent, and then there's feedback to the audience, so that they know that, hey, look, they're actually paying attention to my ideas. So, we encourage all of our clients to set up similar things, and we think, there could be something quite similar for the university as well. Taking it global is actually an interesting social network. It's a bit of we kind of think of it as the United Nations for young people, because it's a global network. It's got about 100,000 young people are subscribers to this. They've undertaken some interesting educational projects. One of them is to connect different classrooms around the world. What they do is, so they've got an experiment where they're linking up classrooms in Canada and in Ghana in Africa, so that the students and the teachers there can work collaboratively on projects. I mean, what a great way to expose students to other cultures and other people around the world. So again, another fantastic opportunity. I've mentioned a couple times that this lecture is being streamed through Second Life, but so could many of your university courses. The idea here is, that Harvard has a virtual law school that people in Second Life can attend. They're not going to get a Harvard Law School degree, but they're going to get access to all of this, really important information from these esteemed faculty members at Harvard. MIT has taken quite a similar approach. It's opened up its courseware, so to speak, so that all of the curriculum that they use, all the source materials, even the lectures are available to somebody in Bangalore, India, or in Beijing, China, or in Sao Paulo, Brazil, or wherever the case may be. They get access again to all this rich educational information. Again, they don't get the MIT degree, but they get access to knowledge, which of course is probably half the battle. Finally, actually, I have one more thing after this, but I just wanted to reflect on. I mentioned the kind of the 21st century textbook and the opportunities provided to create open source curriculum. Well, maybe the medium of the textbook itself needs to be redefined. And I was kind of thinking about what are the kind of 8 things I'd like to see in terms of innovations in the medium. And certainly the first one is increasingly moving to digital textbooks, books that are accessible on any device, whether in a physical format or on a your BlackBerry or iPod or whatever the case may be. Increasingly searchable by words, images, and sounds. True multimedia, so that it engages the 5 senses. this idea that, readers aren't just readers, they become co-producers of the books themselves. So, books could become wiki books. We did a little experiment, with our book where the last chapter, chapter 11, was actually written by a community of several hundred of our readers. It was, a very interesting experiment, and actually I'm happy to say that over the course of a year, we actually got a pretty neat chapter written, and it's now available for free from our website. It's not your conventional book chapter by any stretch. It kind of reads like a bit of a stream of consciousness because, it's got, the viewpoints from hundreds of different people, but the fact that it actually worked, that we were able to put together, a pretty solid chapter, I think was quite remarkable. I like this idea that no book is an island, that you've got all of these hyperlinks between books so that you can, jump from a whole series of different connected ideas. Or this idea of Lego books. I mean, if, you're interested in gardening, maybe you're actually interested in the science or the biology behind gardening, so you could actually assemble your own book. You could take a chapter of, this book and that book and assemble them together in your own sort of customized package. This whole notion of geospatial awareness. What about a book that actually told stories based on your geographic proximity in the world? So if you happen to be, traveling around, it could tell you about the local architecture, history, or culture, and so forth. It would be something that you could carry with you anywhere, and it would automatically download information from the internet. I think, above all is that, we want, books not just to be static products, but, ultimately a platform for learning and collaboration. The last thing I want to say, and I'll just conclude with this, I talked a little bit about, this notion of the end-gen and democracy, but I think we have a historic opportunity to, have educational institutions be part of a national conversation to get students involved in democracy in ways that weren't previously possible. The example that I'm referencing here is called Habitat Jam, and what it was a partnership of the Government of Canada, IBM, and the UN Habitat Program, and what they did is they got, they had a 3-day conversation. Most of it was mediated online over a 72-hour period. 40,000 people from around the world participated in this conversation. The topic was urban sustainability and the challenges facing urban centers around the world. 40,000 people together collectively brainstorming, coming up with ideas and solutions. This is the kind of model we think should be used to do things like fight climate change, for instance, or to get people re-engaged in democracy. And of course, what you could see as an opportunity here is for schools of all levels and universities around the world to be a hub for this kind of participation. So I'll leave you with that tantalizing thought and say thank you very much for your attention. And I don't know where we stand in terms of time. I'm afraid, I guess there's not time for questions, but I'm around for the rest of the afternoon, so feel free to take me aside and I'd be happy to answer your questions. So thank you very much, everybody, and I hope